Duke Nukem 3D stands tall as one of the top first-person shooter games from the 1990s. Its success and legacy quickly saw console ports being pushed into production. As I've talked about previously, these console ports came with their own quirks and issues that came to define them and set them apart from the PC original. PlayStation's huge success in the mid-1990s made a Duke 3D port inevitable, and that landed in 1997, developed by Aardvark Software and overseen by 3D Realms. Unlike the other console ports from this time, this version of Duke Nukem 3D ties itself very closely to the PC original, making minimal changes and cuts to what it offers up, instead delivering what I think many would consider the closest to the PC experience of its age. And from a content perspective, Duke Nukem Total Meltdown delivers one of the strongest offerings of any Duke Nukem game from the 1990s. Not only does it come packing the original 3 episodes with most of the levels fully intact, it also has its own exclusive episode, Plug and Play. These levels by and large are the exact same as their PC counterpart. It means that the PlayStation version of Duke Nukem 3D ends up being the most faithful of the console ports from this time, and this is explained by the fact that this version ported over the build engine, meaning that even most of the glitches that you're fond of from the PC version can work in this version. The exclusive episode is a very mixed bag for me though. I'm not overly fond of it, but the fact that it exists at all and remains exclusive to the PlayStation 1 version of Duke Nukem is interesting. Some of the levels are fun and take inspiration from fun places, like the opening level being very heavy on Tomb Raider, but I also feel that a lot of the levels are overly complex to navigate. They are what they are and definitely worth experiencing once. I would also be remiss if I didn't lavish praise on the soundtrack of this version. The music in this one is arguably among the best renditions of Duke Nukem 3D's soundtrack on any console, taking the originals and spinning them in their own unique ways. Sure, some of the tracks are darker and even more energetic here, and end up changing the vibe of some of the levels, but honestly I don't find myself hating that. I feel the music here definitely lends this edition of Duke Nukem 3D its own special vibe, and what you're hearing right now is from that soundtrack. To me, it's fantastic. Duke's one-liners also make the jump over, and the enemies all make the leap too. Some of the sounds have been tweaked, but it's undeniably Duke Nukem 3D. Graphically, the game looks fine. Everything is a bit lower res and crispier than you'll find on the PC, and it's not uncommon to find small issues here and there. One particular one that I kept finding was that moving flames in the levels stopped working for brief moments, which was kind of awkward. It's passable for what it is, and the levels are all recognisable, so I guess that's a good thing. Unfortunately, the game does have a lot of issues in the performance department. I played this on both real PS1 hardware and on an emulator to try and get a balanced experience for the game, and on both it struggled. These might be more forgivable had the performance held up, but unfortunately playing Duke Nukem 3D on PS1 is a game of hit and miss. Interestingly, it wasn't just the large rooms that caused this, it was the sheer number of enemies as well. Throw more than a handful of enemies into rooms and the game begins to struggle heavily. At times it was bearable, but at its worst the game tumbles to its knees when performance starts crashing down. There are even moments where the game freezes outright and it's just a bit awkward. But surprisingly, this probably isn't the biggest reason most people who've played this version are negative about it. I'd say that a lot of people online really hate the controls of this version of Duke Nukem. This game lands in that weird time where some PS1 games got full analog controls and others didn't. The analog controls on PS1 controls are shocking and quite hard to make use of. The left stick handles movement while the right handles strafing. It never quite feels natural in the hand and sadly makes some of Duke 3D's more puzzle heavy sections feel all the more awkward. The game also doesn't offer free look on the analog sticks, relegating the looking up and down movements to whichever button configuration you've chosen in the options. It makes combat very cumbersome when enemies are at different heights. Speaking of the control schemes, there are 3 different schemes offered up here, and all of them have their own drawbacks. My preference is for the Doomed control scheme as it lets you use the L1 and R1 buttons to strafe, which makes navigating a bit easier for me, but this mode also relegates the look up and down button to pressing L2 and other buttons, which in the heat of battle is just appallingly bad. Using items is also incredibly tedious and can regularly result in you accidentally using your steroids or other items at times you didn't intend. The sad reality is that this was the very early days for controls for games like this on console, and it really shows here. Duke Nukem 3D requires the player to be able to access their inventory quickly, and in Duke Nukem 3D on PlayStation 1 that isn't possible without limiting movement. There's always something fatally compromised in this version no matter which of the control schemes you pick, and it becomes obvious at the wrong moment for the player. I should point out that playing with a modern controller in an emulator, I was able to make the experience much better for myself, but the simple fact is you can't do this on real hardware, and that probably goes some way to explaining why so many people just have nothing nice to say about the controls in this version. Heck, there are even videos on YouTube specifically outlining how to control and make use of the button combinations. It's really sad because the ambition of this port is clear to see. What ends up being delivered is a very awkward offering that almost feels great until it doesn't. Had the team not used the build engine as a base, it's very likely this could have been something truly special. As it stands, this is a version of Duke Nukem that almost achieves greatness but falls short at the finishing line. There are just too many issues with the control scheme and performance to really recommend this to anyone. If you are curious to try out that exclusive episode, there is a fan PC port which brings over the plug and play episode as well as the rest of the game, offering the best opportunity for fans to experience that episode. There is a multiplayer mode in here as well, but you do have to make use of System Link. Ultimately, there are aspects of this port that I really love, like the music, but overall I just don't find myself wanting to come back and experience this more than I have to. Right now I'm going to dive in and play through the first few levels of the game, giving you a showcase of what it's like to experience Duke Nukem Total Meltdown on PlayStation 1.
Damn, those alien bastards are gonna pay for shooting up my ride.
So here we are in Hollywood Holocaust on the PlayStation 1 version of Duke Nukem 3D, and the thing you'll notice is that this looks remarkably close to the PC version at a glance. Like, there's none of the additions that you find in the N64 and Saturn ports here. This is about as close as you can get to the PC version without actually owning a PC, well, at least back in 1997. And you'll also have noticed the music has just kicked in. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to let you just listen to that for a second, because I think the music does need to be appreciated in the context of the game. But yeah, if you do any kind of research into this version of the game, inevitably people will talk about the controls being the biggest issue. And it's kind of funny because I've kind of learned to understand them. Not that I like using them the way that they are, but I think that if you play through an emulator these days, I think you can make the experience a lot better for yourself. But as you can see here, looking up and down is such a chore. It is always a chore. It is never any better than that. And it is unfortunate because I think that had they put free look into the game, had they made it so that you could look up and down using the analog sticks, I think that would have made this a lot more tolerable for people. Luckily in Duke Nukem, it's not the be-all, end-all, because the game does kind of shoot up and down for you. But of course, like, it does make encounters a lot more frustrating at times. But you can see that we can interact with the environment, we can turn light switches on and off, we can even get into this secret up here. But again, like you see here, we need to look down in order to, you know, activate that lift there, and it's just not a fun time. You can also see that this version gets its own versions of these posters, and it's funny because in all of these console ports, they all end up with different sort of posters. You'll have noticed there was a brief dip in performance, and that kind of leans back into what I was saying in the opening bit about this version of Duke Nukem. Unfortunately, it's not even a case of big rooms equals bad performance. Unfortunately, it really is just a case of if there's too many enemies in a space, then the game just does not really like that. Especially if they're all shooting at you. If they're all kind of walking around, it's not too bad, but once they start sort of walking towards you and interacting with you, that's where things get really messy. We're gonna jump inside here. So what's interesting in this version as well is some of the mirrors are kept intact, but like that one there, behind where the jetpack was there, it's actually not there. So they've removed some of the mirrors, but not all of the mirrors, because the one in the bathroom was still there. Luckily, you can still get all the weapons in this apartment, which is very much appreciated. You can see down there as well the flame had stopped moving again. It does that in this version. For some reason, it just does that. Another aspect as well, I think, that doesn't help things in this version, a lot of these levels retain their verticality, which I think helps the Saturn version out, and really it makes you wonder why they didn't just reduce the verticality of some of these areas. I think that may have assisted in the performance issues that this version encounters. But as you can see, wandering around isn't too bad. Once you kind of get used to the bad controls, it's perfectly possible to get around and not have too many issues. When you're kind of exploring, the game isn't too bad. It's only when there's a lot of enemies around you and you need to move quickly that things kind of fall apart. You can hear there as well that that enemy sound was slightly different to the PC version. The pig cops in this version are a bit more aggressive in terms of audio. I think an enemy just dropped down there, but we're not going to deal with that. We also get this lovely little animated intermission screen, which I do appreciate. As said, I don't hate this version. I think that this version does things better than the other console ports, but I also think that this version is very much a victim of overambitious goals. I think bringing the build engine to PS1 was probably not the way to go if they weren't going to change the levels. Because as you can see, this is exactly the same as the PC version of this level. And I'll show you in a second that the glitches do still work in this version. So if you know any glitches to skip parts of level, then you can use them in this version. Unfortunately, it's just not intuitive. Like, I'm using the doomed controls, by the way, here. I'm choosing to use the doomed controls, which I think are the best ones. I genuinely do. But you can see here, I'm fiddling around with the buttons, trying to get, you know, things out, and it's just not intuitive. The control scheme is the big problem, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but watching this and then sort of not being able to experience what it's like in your hand, you won't fully appreciate it until you actually try it yourself. And I do recommend people, if you've never played this version, go out and try to play it, because it's a very ambitious version of Duke Nukem 3D. Because it has all the secrets, it has most of the whole levels intact, and I think that's worthy of praise, especially considering how close it came out to the original Duke Nukem 3D. You can also see that it's still very, yeah, adult. I'm going to grab the RPG there. If you were to ask me which is my least favourite console port of Duke Nukem, that is indeed a very difficult question. I think all three of the ports that I've talked about on this channel so far, all of them offer very kind of interesting takes on Duke Nukem 3D, and they make cuts in very different places. This one probably makes the least number of cuts to get into the PlayStation console, and I think that's both a blessing and a curse. As mentioned, it never gets intuitive, but the soundtrack's good. Like, the N64 version doesn't even have that, you know, as good as that version is. You'll also notice when you look at the skyline and we move side to side, it does kind of warble a tiny bit, and obviously that is clearly the limitations of the PlayStation 1 being laid bare there. Texture warping is a problem on PlayStation 1, and it is quite prominent in this game if you pay attention. You can see everything is here. It's as you would want it to be. You can also use the mighty foot in this version. You can't actually get down to the boot, I don't think, as a weapon, unless you actually run out of ammo. Okay, performance here is a bit hit and miss. Okay, it doesn't like this space at all. I think it's because there's quite a lot going on down here in terms of like the water and such. But again, like with all these ports, it's important to have context. 1997 was very much the middle of the PlayStation 1's life cycle, and you know, this game was one of the few first-person shooters that was trying to push the boundaries. So for that, you kind of have to appreciate what's going on here. You can also jump and crawl in this version, and depending on which control scheme you end up landing on, it can be easy to do that, or it can be a bit cumbersome. The duped 1 and 2 control methods for me, I just find some of the button placements really aggravating. It makes me wish that they'd done what they did with Doom on PlayStation 1, where they let you kind of move the button combinations around yourself. Do love the intensity of the colours in this room though. One area where this version really does shine is in the use of colours, when they do actually use them. It is a very vibrant version of Duke Nukem 3D, this one. And yes, you can still give the ladies their tips. I have played all the way through to the end of the 3rd episode, and what I found was a lot of the issues seem to come up in the 2nd episode in particular. Some of the later levels in the 2nd episode really kind of have performance issues across the board, if you're kind of wondering about that.
What a mess.
As I also mentioned in the blurb, if you do play on an emulator, it does get a lot better, so there is a good game here. I don't even say there's a great game buried underneath the issues in this one, and had they probably spent a bit more time tweaking it, had they spent a bit more time getting things, you know, ready, I think this could have been great. I think this could have been one of the great PS1 games, because the whole package is here, and it very much, you know, screams quality. It's just let down by what I think are some very, very rough edges. And people are not wrong for pointing those edges out. But let me know what you think of Duke Nukem 3D on PlayStation 1. Have you ever played it? Did you ever play it on real hardware? I definitely think I'll be doing more videos on this one, because I have very mixed feelings on this, but I don't hate this version of Duke Nukem 3D. It's very interesting to me, this one. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.